The moment I died, my husband, Richard, revealed his true colors. He brought back his childhood sweetheart and legitimized his illegitimate daughter, Tiffany, in our home. Tiffany snatched my Eleanor's room, her princess. Dresses, everything. At school, she made Eleanor's life a living hell, leading the charge in bullying her. The day my precious daughter drowned, I awoke in her body. They owe my Eleanor everything, and they will pay tenfold. I hauled myself out of the lake, muddy water streaming from my clothes. Clutched tightly in my hand was a necklace. Nothing fancy, just cheap alloy, but the pendant held a tiny photograph of a woman. As I stared down at the faded image, Eleanor's life flashed before my eyes like a rapid-fire film reel. Blissful, carefree days until she was 5. Then, her mother died. Her father remarried, bringing Brenda, his secret daughter, into their lives. That very night, Tiffany had claimed Eleanor's princess-themed bedroom, her frilly dresses, everything that had been Eleanor's. Over time, Eleanor, the true heiress, became the invisible one, the shadow in her own home. Tiffany's cruelty wasn't confined to their house. At school, she orchestrated a campaign of relentless bullying, turning Eleanor's classmates against her. Tiffany had gone home early today, but her cousin, Megan, hadn't let Eleanor off the hook. Just 10 minutes ago, Megan had sneered and ripped the necklace, a precious keepsake, from Eleanor's neck, tossing it into the lake. Without hesitation, Eleanor had plunged into the water to retrieve it. And drowned. The group of girls around the lake hadn't registered anything amiss about me. They just stood there, momentarily stunned, before breaking into laughter and advancing on me, circling me like vultures around carrion. Someone yanked my hair, another aimed kicks at my ribs. Eleanor, you pathetic little nobody. Why didn't you just stay at the bottom of the lake? Something inside me snapped. They had no idea who stood before them now. This wasn't Eleanor, the timid girl they tormented, it was Eleanor's mother, returned from the grave after 13 years of silent fury. Everyone had believed my death was a tragic accident, a slip and fall into the river. But I knew the truth, I had been pushed. Shoving the necklace into my pocket, a manic energy surged through me. I launched myself at Megan, tackling her to the ground. Pinning her arms, I flipped her onto her stomach, planted my foot squarely on her hand, and, grabbing a fistful of her hair, began slamming her head against the grassy bank. The ground wasn't paved, but fate was cruel. Megan's head struck a jagged rock hidden beneath the turf. Blood bloomed instantly, staining the grass crimson. Megan's shriek was animalistic, a high-pitched wail of agony. The other girls recoiled, finally comprehending the shift in power. It took them a moment to react, then they swarmed me, a flurry of grasping hands and kicking feet. They pulled at my clothes, clawed at my arms, desperate to stop me. But I felt nothing, only a cold, burning satisfaction. Megan's head felt sickeningly soft, like a watermelon, and with each impact, I was repaying a fraction of what they owed my Eleanor. Only when Megan's screams faded to choked whimpers, to desperate pleas for mercy, did I release her. I rose, my breath ragged, and stared down at the whimpering girl, her face a mask of blood and tears. My voice, when I spoke, was chillingly calm. Take her to the school nurse. She'll need stitches. This was a society of laws, after all. I couldn't simply kill them, not yet. Justice, I decided, would be served with a slower, more exquisite hand. By the time I arrived back at the Grand Fu residence, it was 7 in the evening. Richard and Brenda were out, undoubtedly at some gala or business dinner, leaving Tiffany to reign supreme in their absence. She sat at the long dining table, picking at her dinner. Seeing me, she delicately placed her knife and fork on her plate, dabbing the corners of her mouth with a linen napkin. Eleanor, come here. The command was delivered in the tone one might use for a disobedient dog. I walked slowly towards her, my gaze fixed, unwavering. I studied her, not with fear or resentment, but with the detached curiosity one might reserve for a corpse. Richard might be a highly educated man, but he had come from nothing. He'd married into my family's wealth, built his empire on my inheritance. And for what? To let his bastard daughter live a life of luxury while my own child was driven to a lonely death in a cold lake? My intense stare clearly unsettled Tiffany. She tilted her chin, adopting a haughty expression. Eleanor, do you have any idea what you did to my cousin? Yes, I said, my voice flat. Then, in a swift, brutal motion, I reached out, grabbed her perfectly styled ponytail, and slammed her face down into her plate of steak. Once, twice, 3 times. Black pepper sauce and gravy smeared across her face, coating her meticulously applied makeup. She was stunned, speechless for a long moment. Then, a high-pitched shriek erupted from her. She flailed, pushing herself back from the table, sauce dripping from her chin. Eleanor, are you insane? How dare you do this to me? Do you want to be thrown out onto the streets? I released her. A chunk of steak clung to her cheek for a moment before sliding off, landing with a splat on her pristine white designer dress. Eleanor. I could see the murderous rage blazing in her eyes. But she lacked the courage to act on it. I reached out, grasped her wrist, and squeezed, just hard enough to elicit a gasp of pain. Then, I released her, my voice soft, almost gentle. Tiffany, this is just an appetizer. We have a long game to play. Leaving her trembling and sputtering, I turned and walked towards the staircase. My room was at the far end of the 2nd floor, a cramped space of barely 100 square feet. Tiffany's, on the other hand, was a sprawling suite, formed by knocking down 3 rooms to create a lavish, princess-themed haven. As I pushed open the door to my meager room, Tiffany's hysterical screams echoed up the stairs. Eleanor, you are dead. I am going to make you pay. Just wait until my mother gets home. Tiffany's idea of making me pay undoubtedly involved summoning Richard and Brenda. Brenda doted on Tiffany, her only daughter, treating her like fragile royalty. As I descended the stairs again, Brenda stormed into the hallway, her face contorted with fury. She rushed towards me, hand raised to strike. I stepped back, easily evading her clumsy attempt. She stumbled, her high heel catching on the edge of the rug, and she nearly fell, catching herself with a yelp of pain. She stood there, glaring, one shoe dangling from her foot. Eleanor, you little viper. How dare you lay a finger on Tiffany? I met her gaze. A dozen scenarios flickered through my mind. The most direct? Feed her into an industrial meat grinder. It would barely begin to quench the inferno of my rage. Brenda was the one who had pushed me. Richard, of course, was her accomplice, providing the false alibi, claiming he'd witnessed my accidental fall. Tiffany was only 2 months younger than Eleanor. They had played me for a fool, a conspiracy of greed and malice, stealing my family's wealth and ultimately, my life. But a quick death was too merciful. They didn't deserve such an easy exit. I decided on a different approach, a more refined torment. I would emulate the butcherbird, that creature of nature known for its gruesome hunting habits. It doesn't grant its prey a swift release, it prefers to slowly tear them apart, savoring their suffering. The tears welled in my eyes, perfectly timed. I adopted a posture of dejected vulnerability. Mrs. Davis, I don't know what you're talking about, I stammered, my voice trembling. Tiffany gaped at me, her face a mask of disbelief. Eleanor, stop pretending. How can you be such a liar? Brenda, in a fit of rage, ripped off her remaining high heel and hurled it at me. The sharp heel struck my forehead, right above my hairline, leaving a throbbing knot. I bowed my head, sobbing with theatrical despair. You have the nerve to cry? Brenda hissed, reaching for another shoe. Enough. Richard's voice boomed, stopping her mid-swing. Brenda, stop it. Do you want to mark her face? How will she face people tomorrow? The company is going public, don't give them any ammunition to use against us. Richard's intervention held no surprise. He didn't love me, and he didn't love Brenda. He had chosen Brenda because she was pliable, easily controlled, a decorative trophy wife in contrast to my independent spirit. But wealth had emboldened Brenda, she'd become increasingly assertive, and their marriage was a constant battlefield. They'd even started living separate lives months ago. Thank you, Father, I whispered, my voice fragile. Excitement began to bubble within me. The hunter, it seemed, was already enjoying the thrill of the chase. That night, I scaled the trellis outside Brenda's bedroom window, silently sliding the window open. Barefoot, I landed soundlessly on the plush carpet, standing like a phantom beside her bed. The room was dark, but I saw her eyes flicker open, startled awake. Tiffany, she murmured, still half asleep. I grinned, a predatory flash of teeth in the darkness, and flicked on the bedside lamp. Eleanor? What are you doing here? I didn't answer. Instead, I grabbed her discarded, sweat-soaked gym sock from the bedside table and shoved it into her mouth, gagging her scream. Then, I began to strike. One hand clamped around her silk pajama collar, yanking her upright, while the other hand moved with brutal efficiency, delivering a rapid-fire volley of slaps across her face, 6 precise, stinging blows. Then, I dragged her out of bed, pulling her onto the floor with a thud, and viciously stomped on her hand, the very hand that had shoved me towards the riverbank all those years ago. She tried to fight back, but my attacks became fiercer, more targeted, aimed at pain, not visible injury. Soon, she simply gave up, collapsing beneath me, whimpering. That's better, I purred, crouching down, forcing her face up to meet mine. I patted her cheek, the gesture mocking and cruel. Brenda, these slaps are just the interest. The principal sum, that's still to come. I retraced my steps, climbing back out the window. As expected, Brenda's enraged shriek ripped through the quiet house. Within minutes, Brenda, half-dressed and furious, dragged a bleary-eyed Richard to my door, kicking it open with a force that rattled the frame. Richard stood in the doorway, glasses askew, his face etched with irritation. Brenda, oblivious to his simmering annoyance, pointed a trembling finger at me. Throw Eleanor out. She's a lunatic. Lunatic? I feigned terror, cowering back against the headboard, pulling the duvet up to my chin, my body shaking dramatically. Mrs. Davis, please don't send me away, please don't. I have nowhere else to go. Brenda's voice was thick with venom. Still pretending, you little witch? She grabbed Richard's arm, trying to pull him into the room, but he shrugged her off, his patience clearly exhausted. Enough, Brenda. Can't you let me get some sleep? I'm exhausted. Eleanor's just a child, what could she possibly do? Next time you fabricate a story, at least make it believable. Climbing in through your window to attack you? Do you think I'm an idiot? Richard turned and stalked away, leaving Brenda sputtering in disbelief. This time, it was Brenda's turn to tremble. Tiffany emerged from her princess suite, rushing to her mother's side. Mom. I sat up in bed, the pathetic act dissolving instantly. The fear vanished from my face, replaced by a cold, calculating composure. My eyes were hard, devoid of emotion. Yet, my voice remained carefully crafted, a pathetic whimper. Mrs. Davis, Tiffany. I'm just an orphan. I swear, I won't take anything from you, I promise. Please, don't throw me out. My Oscar-worthy performance left Brenda and Tiffany utterly dumbfounded. They stared at me, speechless, for a full 3 minutes, unable to utter a single word. The threats arrived the next day, delivered by Tiffany. We were in the back of the family car, on our way to school. She fixed me with a glacial stare. Eleanor, today is your last day at this school. Enjoy it while it lasts. Sure enough, the bell hadn't even finished ringing after first period when I was summoned to the principal's office. Brenda was already there, lounging on the sofa as if she owned the place, along with Megan and her blustering father, Mr. Davis. Mr. Davis, red-faced and furious, shoved a reluctant Megan forward. Don't hide behind me. Tell the principal exactly how Eleanor attacked you. Megan, still clearly traumatized by her encounter with my resurrected rage, darted a nervous glance at me. Then, pointing to the bandage wrapped around her forehead, she whispered, She grabbed my hair, and slammed my head on the ground. The principal turned to me, his expression stern. Eleanor, is this true? Did you attack Megan Davis? Yes, I replied, my voice clear and unwavering. He blinked, momentarily taken aback by my blunt admission. Eleanor, do you understand that violence is a serious offense? Bullying is against school policy and the law. Yes, sir, I said, my voice devoid of remorse. I also understood that when I retaliated against Megan, it was violence. But when Tiffany and Megan led the charge in tormenting Eleanor, it was dismissed as kids being kids, minor disagreements. Your actions are unacceptable. This school cannot tolerate such behavior. We have no choice but to expel you. Expulsion. Just like that. I offered no excuses, no pleas for leniency. Silently, I returned to the classroom, packed my books into my bag, and walked out. As soon as I stepped through the school gates, I was swarmed by reporters. An hour earlier, I had anonymously tipped off several local media outlets. Fu Heiress, Eleanor Fu, to be expelled today. They'd jumped at the chance, sensing a scandal. 2 even had live cameras rolling. Eleanor, is it true? Have you been expelled? Ah, yes, I had prepared for this moment. A sliver of onion nestled discreetly in my pocket. I dabbed at my eyes, then raised a hand to wipe away already forming tears. Before I even began my performance, the tears started to flow. I didn't, I choked out, adopting a posture of wounded innocence. My evasiveness confirmed their suspicions. Eleanor, why were you expelled? I bit my lip, lowering my gaze, a picture of pitiful vulnerability. I can't say. But I swear, I have never bullied anyone. I just want to study, to have a safe place to sleep. But, they won't even let me have that. By the end, my voice broke completely, dissolving into sobs. The onion was potent, next time, a smaller piece. Just as the reporters were beginning to murmur with sympathy, Brenda and Mr. Davis emerged from the school building, beaming. They froze, startled by the media frenzy. Before Brenda could compose herself, the reporters descended on them. Mrs. Davis, can you comment on why Eleanor Fu has been expelled? Brenda, to her credit, recovered quickly, her practiced socialite facade snapping back into place. She rolled her eyes dramatically, directing a look of disdain at me. Why else? Bad breeding, bullying other students, of course. Honestly, what decent school would want to keep someone like that? I seized my moment, rushing forward, a torrent of fake tears and snot streaming down my face. I played the part of the defiant, misunderstood child to perfection. It's not true. I didn't bully Megan. She threw my mother's necklace, my only keepsake, into the lake. That's why I reacted. Before that, they were always the ones bullying me. Brenda's face contorted with rage. She raised her hand to strike me, but before her hand could connect, a reporter's arm shot out, intercepting her. Although physically restrained, Brenda continued her tirade, her voice dripping with venom. You little bastard, you ungrateful, motherless brat. Shut your mouth. And I did. Because my purpose had been served. The moment Brenda walked back into the Fu mansion, Richard's hand lashed out, striking her face, twice. Have I not warned you? The company is going public. I told you to lie low. And this is how you lie low? Richard thrust his phone at Brenda, the news headlines glaring from the screen. Now look. Everyone knows Richard Davis married a child-abusing monster. Brenda burst into tears, protesting her innocence. Abuse Eleanor? How have I abused her? She bullied Megan and got expelled. She deserved it. Richard slapped her again, the sound sharp and brutal in the opulent hall. Do you think I'm blind? I know exactly what you're trying to do, get rid of Eleanor. When I brought her into this house, I made it clear, too many eyes are watching. Eleanor cannot be removed. If you can't stand her, treat her like a dog. A dog, Brenda. Why must you constantly pick fights with a dog? He turned to me, his gaze devoid of any warmth, any semblance of paternal affection. I'm taking Eleanor back to school immediately to reinstate her. You, wipe your face, and get yourself together. Reporters will be here in 2 hours. You will apologize, on camera, and maybe, just maybe, we can salvage this mess. As Richard steered me towards the door, I glanced back at Brenda, a cold smile touching my lips. The fool. Didn't she realize? Even a dog, bearing the Fu name, was more valuable than her. Richard would never allow me to be expelled. Turning back, I let a few more crocodile tears escape. Father, thank you, I whispered, my voice trembling with feigned gratitude. Richard's stride faltered for a moment. He looked at me, a flicker of unease in his eyes, before pulling me onward. Moments later, we were back in the principal's office. The Davises, who had been baying for my blood just hours before, had undergone a dramatic transformation. Oh, Principal Thompson, we are so sorry. It was all a misunderstanding, our fault entirely. We didn't have all the facts, we didn't realize Megan had taken Eleanor's mother's keepsake. A misunderstanding, a complete misunderstanding. Mr. Davis gushed, his voice oily with false contrition. In short, the principal rescinded my expulsion, instructing me to return to class immediately. Richard seemed pleased with the outcome. He shook hands with the principal, his posture radiating refined grace, the epitome of a cultured, benevolent businessman. Thank you, principal. Since it was a misunderstanding, let's consider the matter closed. However, I would appreciate it if the school could issue a clarifying statement to the media. Of course, Mr. Davis, entirely appropriate, Principal Thompson agreed, nodding obsequiously. Richard gestured for me to express my gratitude to the principal. I nodded, took a step forward, inhaled deeply, and then unleashed the full force of the tears I had been cultivating for the past 20 minutes. I clutched at Richard's expensive suit jacket, burying my face in the fabric. Father, I sobbed, my voice thick with manufactured emotion, it's not a misunderstanding. Megan and her friends have been bullying me for months. They beat me up, they cornered me in the bathroom, they made my life a living hell. She did bully me. And I get expelled for fighting back, but she gets away with it? Between sobs, I made sure to wipe my nose theatrically on his tailored suit. The script, it seemed, had taken an unexpected turn. Richard stood frozen, utterly bewildered. Before he could react, Mr. Davis exploded. My reinstatement was already a bitter pill to swallow, now, I was dragging Megan down with me? Unacceptable. Eleanor Fu, you insolent little liar. Who do you think you are? You're nothing but an illegitimate child. You think you can get Megan expelled now? Mr. Davis had played his part perfectly. He hadn't disappointed me. And Richard? His face had hardened, his eyes glinting cruelly. My dear stepfather, for all his polished veneer, was fiercely possessive, especially when it came to his image. Even if I was just the Fu family dog, he would never tolerate anyone daring to kick it in public, especially not in front of him. He turned to Principal Thompson, his voice dangerously low. Eleanor is right. Bullying is not a trivial matter. I expect the school to handle this appropriately, impartially. I trust you will conduct a thorough investigation into the allegations of bullying made by Eleanor Fu. The principal, sensing the shift in the wind, nodded rapidly, his earlier pronouncements of misunderstanding forgotten. Of course, Mr. Davis. Absolutely. We will launch a full investigation immediately. Back in class, it was Megan's turn to pack her bag and leave. Tiffany was incandescent with rage. The moment class ended, she stormed over to me. Eleanor, she hissed, everyone in school knows Megan is my cousin. You getting her expelled is a slap in my face, and everyone else's. I gave her a slow nod, a genuine smile playing on my lips. You're quite self-aware. But you, she retorted, her voice dripping with venom, why don't you have the self-awareness to realize you're nothing but a bastard? Her face contorted with fury as she scanned our surroundings, lowering her voice to a furious whisper. Eleanor, you just wait until school's out. Tiffany had a loyal pack of sycophants at her beck and call. She often gathered them like a queen holding court, staging mock trials. For Eleanor. Tiffany would pronounce Eleanor's supposed crimes, and the others would carry out the punishment. Sometimes it was a barrage of kicks and punches, other times they'd tear Eleanor's clothes, or lock her in a bathroom and douse her with freezing water. Even when Tiffany wasn't physically present, she'd subtly direct Megan to lead the torment, as she had done before Eleanor's drowning. Today, I dared to displease her. Of course, she intended to follow her usual playbook. But Tiffany was in for a rude awakening. The woman standing before her was no longer the timid Eleanor she knew. This was a mother who had lost her child. And a mother, driven by grief and rage, was capable of anything. After school, I deliberately chose a route home Eleanor rarely took. Leaving the classroom, I walked slowly, head down, away from the main school gate. I slipped down a less traveled path, leading toward the indoor basketball court. The basketball court had 4 exits. One led to the playing fields a few hundred yards away, the back gate in the same direction. As I reached the center of the court, I heard a series of sharp thwacks, the sound of doors slamming shut. All 4 exits were simultaneously sealed. As expected, Tiffany emerged from the shadows, a triumphant smirk twisting her features. From each doorway, two of her cronies materialized, blocking any escape. Eleanor, did you actually think getting rid of Megan meant you'd won? You're just pathetic. A motherless little nobody. You're not even in the same league as me. Tiffany gestured imperiously. Two girls surged forward, seizing my arms and dragging me toward Tiffany. With a flourish, Tiffany raised her hand and slapped me hard across the face. The sting was insignificant, a mere tickle, compared to the icy rage simmering within me. I calmly reminded her, Tiffany, we're in the basketball court. There are security cameras. Aren't you worried? Huh. Thanks for the tip, you idiot. Tiffany gestured dismissively toward a door further in the distance. Take her to the storage room. As she spoke, her fingers unconsciously clenched into a fist. I knew she was already relishing the thought of inflicting pain. But soon, the usurper, the illegitimate daughter, would learn a harsh lesson. Karma was real. What Eleanor couldn't avenge, her mother would. My deliberate detour to the basketball court had been calculated. The security cameras were there for a reason. Tiffany's slap, her blatant act of bullying, would be captured, providing undeniable proof. But the storage room. That was to be Tiffany's judgment hall. No one took me seriously. Even the two girls flanking me, propelling me toward the storage room, were nonchalant, giggling as they followed Tiffany, who strutted ahead, a cruel smile playing on her lips. Tiffany, even if you're furious, remember, don't hit her face. We don't want to leave obvious marks. Evidence, you know, one of them snickered. Tiffany's mood visibly lifted. Turning her head slightly, she shot a smug look back at me. Evidence? What evidence? She's just a nobody. It's not like I'm anyone important. Oh, Tiffany, I thought, you have no idea. The moment I stepped into the dimly lit storage room, I whirled around with surprising speed. Catching the two girls completely off guard, I shoved them backwards with all my strength. They stumbled out of the doorway, tripping over each other. In a swift motion, I slammed the door shut and locked it, the bolt clicking into place with a satisfying thud. The sudden shift in power left even Tiffany momentarily stunned. Her face paled, but she quickly masked her fear with bravado. Eleanor, what do you think you're doing? I remained silent, advancing slowly towards her. With each step I took, she retreated, her eyes widening with dawning comprehension. Finally, her back hit the wall of shelves, trapping her. Escape was impossible. The girls outside were pounding and screaming at the door, but I ignored them, focusing solely on Tiffany. I grinned, a chilling, predatory smile, and reached out, grasping the delicate fabric of her expensive princess dress. Snap. Snap. Two sharp slaps echoed in the confined space as I repaid her earlier insult. Eleanor, how dare you hit me, she shrieked, her voice laced with outrage and disbelief. How dare I? The audacity of this girl, this illegitimate child, this daughter of a murderer, to even ask that question. Words failed me. Instead, I grabbed her, yanking her forward with brutal force, and ripped her dress with the same viciousness she had once torn Eleanor's. My nails raked across her skin, drawing thin lines of blood. She retaliated, tears streaming down her face, but her pampered, princess-like strikes were weak, ineffective. I easily deflected her feeble attempts. In seconds, I'd ripped strips from her torn dress and used them to bind her wrists together. I snatched a wooden rod from a nearby shelf, hefted it in my hand, and began to rain blows down on her, aiming for her arms, legs, and torso. Tiffany, I said, my voice low and menacing, I told you, we're just getting started. Fear, raw and palpable, finally flooded Tiffany's eyes. For the first time, she sounded genuinely terrified as she stammered, Eleanor, please. I'm sorry, please, just let me go. I reached out, gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her tear-streaked face, and with mock tenderness, wiped a single tear from her cheek. Tiffany, I murmured, my voice a chilling caress, bullies never deserve forgiveness. I jammed a rag into her mouth, silencing her pleas, and unleashed my pent-up fury, pummeling her with my fists. Soon, her face was a swollen, bruised mess, blood trickling from her nose. Satisfied with my handiwork, and hearing the increasing violence of the pounding on the door, I untied her bound wrists. Tiffany, whimpering, scrambled to her feet, spitting out the gag, along with a dislodged tooth. Just as she did, the storage room door splintered open. 8 girls surged in, their faces contorted with rage. Tiffany, her eyes blazing with hatred, pointed at me. Get her. I dodged past them, sprinting for the exit, but they were too many. I was tackled in the middle of the basketball court, overwhelmed by a swarm of bodies. They piled on top of me, a chaotic flurry of fists, feet, tearing clothes, and yanking hair. My strength ebbed away, and I collapsed, limp and defeated, onto the polished floor. Then, a bright light flooded the basketball court. One of the large doors at the far end burst open, and 2 paparazzi photographers sprinted in, cameras flashing wildly, capturing every moment of my brutal assault. In the sterile white of the hospital room, Richard erupted in fury at Tiffany. Gang violence. School bullying. Tiffany, do you have any idea how much money I had to spend to buy those videos from the paparazzi? Tiffany lay in the hospital bed, her left arm encased in a plaster cast. In the storage room, my wrath had been precise, her wrist was broken. She was the picture of wounded innocence. But Dad, it wasn't me. It was Eleanor. Richard, it seemed, had developed a knack for interrupting. He cut her off without a shred of sympathy. Eleanor started a gang fight? Eleanor bullied you? You're the victim here? Tiffany's expression flickered with discomfort. Yes, she mumbled weakly. Yes? Richard's laugh was bitter, humorless. How could I have raised such a fool? Tiffany, do you think the school security cameras are just for decoration? There's not a single frame of Eleanor hitting you in the basketball court footage. But you leading a gang to attack Eleanor? Crystal clear. Tiffany shot me a venomous glare, her teeth gritted. But she... Shut up. Richard's patience had snapped. Tiffany, you will behave yourself from now on. If you jeopardize the company's IPO, you can kiss your monthly allowance goodbye. Brenda, who had been simmering silently, finally reached her breaking point. Tiffany was her precious jewel, her heart's delight. To see Richard berate her so harshly, to constantly belittle her. It was too much. She rushed to Tiffany's side, wrapping her in a protective embrace. It's all right, darling. Your father won't give you pocket money? Your mother will. Half of your father's fortune is your mother's anyway. Richard looked like he was about to explode. His lips trembled with suppressed rage. Finally, wordlessly, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the room. While my injuries were significant, they were mostly superficial. I didn't require hospitalization. After watching the family drama unfold, I quietly followed Richard out of the hospital. He didn't notice me until he opened the car door, then he frowned, his gaze landing on me with undisguised displeasure. Even though I had, through sheer luck and evidence, managed to portray myself as the victim in this latest incident, in Richard's eyes, I remained an unwelcome presence. I knew he was about to launch into a tirade, to find fault with me somehow. So, I preempted him, tears welling up in my eyes. I lowered my head, adopting a pathetic, vulnerable posture. Father, I began, my voice trembling, I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have, but Tiffany was hurting me so badly. And she insulted my mother. She said you had bad taste for choosing her. My mother, her death was an accident, a fall into the river. I just don't understand why Tiffany has to insult her, even though she's gone. So I fought back. By the end, I was biting my lip, perfecting the art of the silent sob. Richard, as expected, didn't utter a single word of reproach. He even reached out, patting the top of my head. Awkwardly. He sighed. I've neglected you these past years, Eleanor. You're a good child, wanting to defend your mother's honor. Tiffany was wrong. She's spoiled and undisciplined. I seized the opportunity, taking Richard's hand in mine. Father, I said, my voice small and plaintive, I miss Mother so much. A rare flicker of wistful sentimentality softened Richard's eyes. Yes, he murmured, your mother was kind, gentle, and understanding. She never argued with me over trivial things. Not like your Aunt Brenda. Of course, I wasn't naive enough to believe that Richard's sudden surge of paternal warmth was genuine. His fond memories of my mother were simply a reflection of his deep-seated dissatisfaction with Brenda. Or perhaps he had already set his sights on a new conquest. Why else would he be sleeping in a separate bedroom from Brenda? He had betrayed me once, betrayal was clearly in his nature. I sniffled delicately. I wish I could have a mother as wonderful as mine again. A faint smile touched the corners of Richard's mouth. Get in the car, Eleanor. 2 weeks later, Richard bought me a new dress, something frilly and pink that Tiffany would have coveted, and took me to a lavish evening gala. It was the first time since my death that Richard had brought Eleanor to such a public event. As we arrived at the entrance, a young woman, barely in her early 20s, dressed in a shimmering silver gown, was waiting. She was strikingly beautiful, with a gentle, serene air. She greeted us with a warm smile, showing no surprise at my presence. Eleanor, hello darling, she said, her voice soft and melodic. I'm Summer, your father's financial advisor. You can call me Aunt Summer. My suspicions were confirmed. Richard had indeed moved on. And financial advisor? Please. I beamed at Summer, my most saccharine smile plastered on my face. Aunt Summer? But you're so young and beautiful. I can't possibly call you Aunt Summer. My flattery clearly pleased Summer, and Richard beamed, patting my shoulder. See? Eleanor's such a sensible girl. Throughout the gala, Richard kept me close, eagerly introducing me to everyone he knew. This is Eleanor, my daughter with Chinwan. Outsiders, unfamiliar with the inner workings of the Fu family, might have easily fallen prey to Brenda's fabricated rumors, believing me to be the illegitimate child. But the people in this social circle knew the truth. They greeted me with genuine warmth. Eleanor, is that really you? You've grown so much. She looks just like her mother, doesn't she? I smiled and chatted politely, even raising my glass of juice in a mock toast to the older guests, earning further compliments and pleased nods from Richard. After a while, Richard joined a group of men engrossed in a business discussion, leaving Summer to escort me around. Once we were on the terrace, away from the crowd, I feigned shyness, tugging gently at Summer's sleeve. My eyelashes fluttered nervously, my lips pressed together in a picture of hesitant innocence. Finally, I blurted out, Aunt Summer. I wish you could marry my father. Summer froze, momentarily taken aback. Then, she laughed, dismissing the idea. Oh, Eleanor, don't be silly. I'm already incredibly lucky to be with Richard. I wouldn't dare dream of anything more. But you should, I insisted, tightening my grip on her hand. Brenda dared to dream it, didn't she? Why shouldn't you? Aunt Summer, I think you'd be a much better wife to my father than Aunt Brenda ever was. Summer shook her head again, but her denial lacked conviction. Richard and I are together because of love. I don't want anything else. But the subtle upward curve of her lips, the almost imperceptible quickening of her pulse beneath my fingertips, betrayed her. Summer was ambitious. Very ambitious. That evening, Richard and I returned home, through the basement garage. As we entered the living room, the lights flicked on with a dramatic snap. Brenda was perched on the sofa, her face a mask of cold fury. She turned her head slowly, her chin held high, radiating an aura of icy disdain. Richard, she spat, her voice sharp as shards of glass, where have you been? And why did you take her? Richard's expression remained impassive. We attended a gala. He continued walking, me trailing slightly behind him. We were almost at the foot of the staircase leading to the second floor when Brenda suddenly sprang to her feet like a coiled viper. Snatching a heavy crystal vase from a nearby table, she hurled it at Richard with all her might. Richard ducked just in time. The vase crashed against the wall beside him, shattering into a million glittering fragments. Richard. How dare you take Eleanor to a gala? We agreed. Tiffany is the only princess in this family. Eleanor is just a dog we keep around the house. How dare you break your promise? With a guttural cry, Brenda lunged at Richard, her hands clawing at his face. Richard, though quick to react, managed to grab her wrists, but not before her nails raked 3 bloody lines across his neck. Richard. How could you do this to Tiffany? Brenda shrieked, her voice bordering on hysteria. Richard's face was now a thundercloud of rage. He shoved Brenda away from him with a brutal force. She stumbled backwards, losing her balance, and crashed to the floor, her eyes wide with disbelief as she looked up at him. Richard stared down at her, his gaze glacial, utterly devoid of warmth. Brenda, he said, his voice dangerously low, I took you from behind a department store counter and made you a wealthy woman. Shouldn't that be enough for you? Eleanor is also my daughter. Why shouldn't I take her to a gala? Brenda launched into another tirade, her words a torrent of curses directed at me. I should have strangled that little viper when I had the chance. Enough. Richard snapped, seizing my hand protectively. Brenda, don't you forget, Eleanor is the legitimate heiress. Tiffany is the one who's illegitimate. If you keep acting like this, you're the one who'll be humiliated, not me. With that, Richard ignored Brenda's escalating screams and pulled me upstairs. As I opened the door to my bedroom, I saw Tiffany emerge barefoot from her room. She glanced down the stairs, then turned her venomous gaze on me. I returned her stare with a sweet smile, even giving her a cheerful little wave. The next morning, in the car, Tiffany, seemingly recharged with fury overnight, launched a fresh verbal assault. So, Dad took you to a gala? Big deal, Eleanor. Don't get any ideas. You're not going to get a single penny of the fortune. I nodded agreeably. You're right, I won't. But neither will you, Tiffany. I flashed her a wide, cheerful grin. Because Dad's going to find me a new mother soon. Someone kind and beautiful. Someone a million times better than your mother. Brenda, with her high school diploma and limited worldview, had never been a true asset to Richard's empire. Her primary role had been to spend lavishly with Richard's credit cards, indulging in endless shopping sprees. She rarely ventured near his company. Therefore, Summer's presence at Food Corporation was hardly a secret. Yet, Brenda, blinded by denial, remained blissfully unaware. My casual remark, however, seemed to have finally pierced her carefully constructed bubble of self-deception. That very day, Brenda stormed into Food Corporation, catching Richard and Summer in a compromising position. Rumor had it that Brenda had descended into a frenzy, attempting to drag a barely dressed Summer out of Richard's office by her hair, only to be rewarded with 2 brutal slaps from Richard. Of course, these were just whispers, their veracity unconfirmed. What I did witness upon returning home from school that day was a scene of utter devastation. The Fu mansion resembled a battleground. Even the plush sofas were slashed and ripped, victims of Brenda's fury. Her face bore the unmistakable marks of Richard's violence. For the next few nights, Richard was conspicuously absent. Then, one Saturday, he returned, Summer clinging possessively to his arm. Summer, upon seeing Brenda, feigned a startled gasp, attempting to shrink back into Richard's embrace. Richard, however, tightened his hold, pulling her closer. You're my woman, Summer. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Don't hide. Richard led Summer into the living room, settling her comfortably on the sofa. He then proceeded to the kitchen, returning with a bunch of grapes, which he proceeded to feed to Summer, one by one, as Brenda watched, a statue of frozen fury. He completely ignored Brenda's existence. Brenda, predictably, snapped. Another wave of hysterical screaming erupted. Richard's face darkened with anger, but Summer, ever the smooth operator, intervened, approaching Brenda with a placating smile. Brenda, darling, don't be upset. She cooed, taking Brenda's hand in hers. You'll always be the elder sister here, no one can ever take your place. We both love Richard. Why can't we all just get along? Let's make him happy, every day, shouldn't that be our goal? Slap. Brenda's hand shot out, striking Summer across the face. Simultaneously, Richard's hand lashed out, striking Brenda with equal force. 2 words, cold and final, fell from his lips. Divorce. It's over. Brenda, in a defiant, tear-choked voice, retorted, divorce? Fine. Richard, don't forget, I'm Mrs. Fu. Even in a divorce, I'm entitled to half of your assets. Half my assets? Richard's lips curled into a chilling smile. You must be dreaming. Seeing that unsettling smile, I knew Richard wouldn't disappoint me. And he didn't. Less than 2 weeks later, Brenda was caught in a compromising situation, orchestrated by Richard himself. That evening, Richard insisted on taking Brenda and me to another gala. At the event, numerous guests offered Brenda drinks. Though she had a decent tolerance for alcohol, the constant mixing of wine and spirits soon took its toll. Within half an hour, she was visibly tipsy, her speech slurred. It was then that a charming, younger man, all smooth smiles and practiced compliments, approached her. Under the combined influence of alcohol and male attention, Brenda, in a haze of intoxication, allowed herself to be led away. An hour later, Richard, his face a mask of controlled fury, summoned hotel staff and, in front of a crowd of stunned onlookers, officially claimed his cuckold status. Brenda, collapsing in tears, begged Richard for forgiveness, but he remained stonily silent. Upon returning home, Richard thrust divorce papers into Brenda's trembling hands. Brenda retreated to her room, a broken woman, consumed by weeping and remorse, teetering on the edge of madness. Tiffany observed her mother from the doorway for a long moment, her eyes red-rimmed, before retreating to her own room, unable to face the unfolding tragedy. Late that night, I quietly pushed open Brenda's bedroom door. She was silent, but not asleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hair disheveled, her eyes vacant. "Brenda," I whispered softly. Her eyes flickered, a spark of something igniting within their emptiness, not warmth, but a chilling, raw hatred. "Eleanor," she hissed, "even in my misery, I'm still above you, you little bastard." "Really?" I closed the door gently behind me. "Brenda, guess why Richard, a man obsessed with appearances, would rather be publicly humiliated, wear the green hat of a cuckold, than simply divorce you quietly?" Her eyes darted to mine, a flicker of uncertainty in their depths. I smiled, approaching her, bending down to whisper in her ear. "I overheard him telling Summer. Before you got married, he made you sign a prenuptial agreement. It clearly states that if you commit adultery, you get nothing. Zero. Maybe you should take another look at that agreement, Brenda. All that climbing. And in the end, you're left with absolutely nothing." Brenda's eyes glazed over for a moment, then widened with dawning horror. She snatched up the divorce papers, her fingers trembling as she scanned the fine print. After a long, silent moment, a low chuckle escaped her lips. The chuckle grew into a chilling, manic laugh, devoid of humor, filled with a chilling, desperate rage. Even her eyes seemed to harden, becoming cold and merciless. I said nothing more, simply turned and left. Downstairs, I poured myself a cup of tea, not bothering to turn on the lights, and sat on the sofa, sipping slowly in the darkness. Just as I finished the last drop, I heard a scream. A piercing, blood-curdling shriek, like something unearthly, something dragged up from the depths of hell. "Richard! You planned this. You set me up. I'll kill you. I'll kill you." Brenda, driven to the brink, was a force of nature. She stabbed Richard over a dozen times. Apart from 2 wounds on his back, all the blows were concentrated on his lower body. Sadly, Richard didn't die. But, to my immense satisfaction, his manhood was effectively obliterated, and he was left paralyzed from the waist down. Upon hearing the news of Richard's attack, Summer rushed to the hospital, her performance Oscar-worthy. She wept hysterically in the waiting room, and when Richard was wheeled out of the emergency room, she threw herself onto him, wailing. Richard regained consciousness soon after. The doctors had advised us to shield him from the grim reality of his condition, but Summer couldn't wait. Her desire for the Mrs. Fu title outweighed any semblance of compassion. She subtly, then not so subtly, revealed the extent of Richard's irreversible damage. Richard, upon fully grasping his fate, promptly fainted again. When he awoke a second time, his face contorted with rage. "I'll make Brenda pay. I'll make her rot in hell." He instructed his assistant to retrieve the old security footage, the video of Brenda pushing me into the river all those years ago. Richard, it seemed, was truly devoid of a soul. I had been merely a pawn in his game, but Brenda had been too. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Brenda offered no further denials. But, in a final act of defiance, she attempted to drag Richard down with her. He was the mastermind. He ordered me to kill Chin-Wan. Unfortunately for Brenda, her cunning was no match for Richard's. 13 years had passed. She had no concrete proof, and Richard, as always, managed to slither out of the grasp of the law. However, the scandal, the whispers, the accusations, they were enough to send Fu Corporation's reputation plummeting. The IPO, as expected, was doomed. 3 months later, Brenda was sentenced to death. Execution was immediate. Simultaneously, Summer officially moved into the Fu mansion. Tiffany's dark chapter had begun. Because Summer hadn't yet formally married Richard, and because I was careful to speak well of her to Richard, she treated me with a semblance of politeness. But towards Tiffany, she was merciless. Summer evicted Tiffany from her princess suite, giving it to me, and relegated Tiffany to a cramped, dusty room. She fired the maids, forcing Tiffany to perform all the household chores. And when Summer was in a bad mood, Tiffany became her personal punching bag, both literally and figuratively. Under Summer's relentless torment, Tiffany's arrogance and entitlement were slowly eroded, replaced by a palpable, brooding resentment. One day, we crossed paths in the hallway. Tiffany glared at me, her voice cold and flat. "Eleanor, don't get cocky. You owe me. I'll get my revenge." Seeing the unwavering resolve in her eyes, I offered her a helpful suggestion. "How will you get revenge, Tiffany? Unless you can somehow convince Dad to leave you everything, make you the mistress of the Fu fortune, you'll just end up as garbage." Her eyes widened, a spark of desperate hope igniting within them. The simple child, so easily manipulated. The next morning, armed with a hastily printed inheritance agreement, Tiffany crept into Richard's room, taking advantage of a moment. When Summer was out, I watched her through the hidden security camera I had secretly installed, observing her pathetic performance. She presented the agreement to Richard. He, predictably, scoffed and tossed it to the floor. Tiffany then erupted, throwing herself onto Richard, raining blows down on his face. "Sign it, you bastard. Sign it. Or I'll kill you." Tiffany fled to the kitchen, returning with a knife. The sight of the blade seemed to finally shatter Richard's remaining defenses. He trembled, his hand shaking, and signed the agreement. When I returned home that evening, I found Richard lying in bed, bruised and swollen, silently weeping. I said nothing, simply fetched a basin of warm water and a soft cloth, gently tending to his wounds. My touch was gentle, patient. A stark contrast to Tiffany's violent outburst. He gazed at me for a long time, then asked me to make 2 phone calls. One was to a mental institution. He had Tiffany committed. The other was to his assistant, instructing him to arrange the legal transfer of his assets. That afternoon, witnessed by a notary and several lawyers, Richard signed over his entire fortune to me. Summer didn't return until late that evening. Upon learning the news, she flew into a rage, dragging Richard from the bed. "You old fool. You're crippled, useless, and old, and I still agreed to be with you. And you weren't even going to leave me a dime?" Throughout her tirade, I stood quietly in the corner, observing. Only when Richard began to gasp for breath, his face contorted in pain, did I step forward, turning to Summer with a saccharine smile. "Aunt Summer, that's enough." She turned to me, her expression slowly shifting, morphing into a look of grudging respect. Finally, she straightened, a harsh laugh escaping her lips. "So, it was you all along, Eleanor. I really underestimated you." She kicked Richard's paralyzed legs, with vicious force. "Richard, your life is over." Summer left. Richard, left alone with me, continued to mutter and curse. "That woman. I never realized she was so unreasonable. What does she mean, my life is over? My Eleanor is such a good daughter, so filial. No one can take care of me like my Eleanor." He reached out his hand, expecting me to help him up. I ignored his outstretched hand. Instead, I rose to my feet, towering over him. Then, I lifted my foot and brought it down hard, grinding my heel into his outstretched palm. "Richard," I said, my voice soft, but laced with steel, "you're right. No one can take care of you like I can." "But," I corrected him, my smile widening, "there's one thing you're wrong about. Eleanor is dead. The woman standing in front of you is Chin. He stared at me, disbelief warring with dawning horror in his eyes. He clearly didn't believe me. But as I recounted details, secrets known only to him and me, his denial crumbled. Fear, stark and naked, replaced it. "Chin, what are you going to do?" "Don't worry, Richard," I purred. "I won't let you die. I'm going to keep you alive," I continued, my voice a chilling whisper, "so you can pay for everything you've done. You called Eleanor a dog, didn't you?" I smiled, a truly terrifying smile. "From today onwards, you're going to be a dog. A real dog." I cut him off from the outside world, confined him to a cramped, dark room, and fed him only scraps, the leftovers I would have otherwise thrown away. Karma. This was his just reward. The end.